Scott stood at the side of my hospital bed, his voice calm but with an undertone of authority. "Where's the ATM card? Let me handle it." He gave me a small, triumphant smile as if he already knew what the answer would be. I was lying in the hospital, weak from the treatments for my cancer. The smile on his face made me uneasy, like he had his own plans now that he knew where my card was. I looked up at him, trying to find a hint of concern, something that would tell me I could trust him. "There's $800,000 in that account," I told him. My voice was soft, and I tried to keep it steady. Handle it carefully. I wanted to trust Scott, my husband, but a part of me was wary. I had thought this through before giving him my card. Deep down, I knew this was a risk, but it was part of my plan. After Scott left, I couldn't help but feel the gnawing anxiety growing inside me. The next few days in the hospital were tough, and Scott wasn't there for most of them. I had hoped for some comfort, someone who would hold my hand during the worst of it. Instead, all I received were brief, cold messages that seemed more like a chore for him than genuine concern. When I finally got out of the hospital, I went home, hoping to pick up some clothes and things I needed. What I found instead shocked me to the core: a divorce application lying on the table, along with a hastily written note. My heart sank. It confirmed the fears I had buried deep within me. Scott had taken my ATM card, and along with it, everything we had built together. But rather than feeling defeated, a fire ignited inside me. This was just the beginning of my own plan to take back control of my life. I'm Shirley, a woman in my 50s, and this is my story. When I first married Scott, I thought he was a wonderful man, kind and caring, someone who would be my partner through the ups and downs of life. The first 3 months of our marriage were smooth, almost blissful. But things began to change, and quickly. His true colors emerged as he showed me who he really was. Scott believed a wife should always put her husband first, no matter the situation. At first, I tried to meet his expectations, hoping it was just a phase, but it wasn't. The demands became more specific. Scott insisted that I wash his clothes separately, clean his room first, cook whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. Even if he decided not to eat, without warning, he expected me to cater to his every whim. His words were harsh, his tone sharp. "A wife should always listen to her husband," he would say, using his words like weapons, making me feel small, as though I was a failure. The love I once felt for him began to wane as I struggled to please him and fulfill his endless demands. One day, while doing the endless list of chores Scott demanded, I felt lightheaded. The stress, exhaustion, and lack of care from my own husband had taken their toll on me. I lost consciousness, collapsing in the living room with a thud that startled the neighbors. The building manager was called, and soon I was in an ambulance being rushed to the hospital. When I woke up, the doctors told me they needed to run tests, and I hoped, oh how I hoped, that it was nothing serious. But hope is a funny thing. The tests revealed I had cancer. The diagnosis hit me hard. I wasn't sure if it was because of all the stress or just pure misfortune, but the news left me shaken. I had no close family nearby. My father lived 5 hours away by plane, and my mother had passed a few years back. Feeling lost, I called Scott. He didn't respond right away. Hours later, he sent a brief message. "I'll come to the hospital tomorrow." No words of comfort, no show of concern, just a promise to come by. The nurses, sensing my distress, tried to offer words of kindness, but it only made me feel worse, reminding me of what was missing in my marriage. The next day, Scott showed up. He looked at me with a detached expression. "You look healthier than I thought. I expected you to be more frail," he said, his words cutting through me. I kept my cool and told him to leave my things and go. But Scott hadn't even brought the things I needed, despite my repeated requests. He looked confused, as if he didn't remember I had asked for anything at all. My frustration grew, but I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. When I asked why he had come, if not to help, he smiled and asked for the ATM card. It all became clear in that moment. He was there not out of concern for me, but to take control of my money. "Where's the ATM card? Let me handle it," he repeated, this time with a hint of excitement in his voice. He didn't care about me. He cared about the money. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw Scott for who he really was, a selfish man driven by greed. I decided to give him the card, but not without a plan. "There's $800,000 in that account," I told him, my voice steady. "Take care of it." His eyes lit up with surprise and greed. I had made that money through careful investments in the stock market while taking care of the house. I wanted to keep it hidden, knowing what Scott might do if he ever found out. But now I had a different plan. The banks were closed for the holiday, and Scott had work the next day. He wouldn't be able to access the money immediately, giving me just enough time. The next day, I went home under the guise of picking up some belongings. I wanted to check if Scott had taken the bait. As I walked into the living room, I saw the divorce papers on the table, along with a handwritten note. "Sorry for the rush, but let's get divorced. Please sign and submit the papers." I checked the shelf where I'd left the ATM card, and it was gone. Most people would have felt devastated to lose such a large sum, but I felt a smile spread across my face. Scott had taken the bait. I signed the divorce application, packed my things, and left the house we had shared for years. I didn't look back. I went straight to the bank and reported the card as stolen. The bank blocked it immediately, ensuring Scott couldn't access a single cent of the money. I returned to the hospital, feeling lighter. I was ready to focus on my treatment, on my recovery, without the weight of Scott dragging me down. Back at the hospital, I received multiple calls from Scott. He sounded desperate. "I can't withdraw the money, please tell me how to do it," he pleaded. His voice, usually so controlled, now sounded panicked. I kept my tone calm. "If you can't withdraw it, then give up," I said. His desperation was almost amusing. He had always been so sure of himself, so sure he could control me. But now he was the one who needed me. "Don't be so harsh," he said, trying to sound pitiful. "We were husband and wife, after all. We should help each other." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same man who had ignored my pleas for help, who had treated me like nothing more than a servant. "Are you really having trouble withdrawing the money?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Yes," he answered, sounding defeated. "I urgently need that $800,000. Please just tell me what to do." I almost laughed. The card he had wouldn't work anymore. I had filed a report, and it was now useless to him. I spoke plainly. "The card won't work anymore," I told him. There was silence on the other end as he processed what I had said. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rising in panic. "An ATM card should just work." "Normally, yes," I replied, "but the one you took is now useless. I filed a report for a stolen card earlier today." There was another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to understand what had just happened. I had outsmarted him, and he knew it. "Why?" he demanded, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Because you took it without my permission," I said calmly. "And now it's blocked. You can't access the money. On top of that, I've already submitted the divorce papers. You have no claim on me or my money anymore." His silence spoke volumes. He had thought he could manipulate me, control me, but he had underestimated me. "How does it feel to be outsmarted by the woman you always looked down on?" I asked, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. "I don't know what you needed the money for, but I won't be handing it over to you under these circumstances." His voice broke. "Please, Shirley, I'm begging you. You're the only one I have left. I need that money. I'll do anything." I felt no sympathy for him. "Why do you need it so urgently?" I asked, genuinely curious. After a long pause, Scott admitted the truth. He had quit his job, expecting to live off my savings. He had started spending recklessly, gambling, and had quickly run up a debt of $600,000. The lenders were now demanding repayment, and without access to my money, he was in deep trouble. His recklessness had led him to this point, and now he was paying the price. "My future is ruined without that money," he said, his voice filled with despair. He had abandoned the divorce papers, shamelessly trying to reach out to me for help. But after everything he had done, I felt nothing for him. No pity, no sorrow, just a sense of closure. He had dug his own grave, and now he would have to lie in it. "Please, Shirley," he continued, his voice trembling. "You're the only person I can turn to. If you abandon me, I don't know what will happen." His words were filled with blame, as if I was responsible for his situation. But the truth was clear. His actions had led him here. "Stop making excuses," I replied, my voice steady. "You're just facing the consequences of your own choices. Handle it yourself." With that, I ended the call. Scott kept calling back, but I ignored him. Eventually, I blocked his number. I was done with him, done with the manipulation, the lies, the abuse. With the divorce papers filed, Scott and I were no longer connected. I was free, truly free, for the first time in years. I focused on my recovery. It wasn't easy. The treatments were grueling, and there were days when I felt like giving up. But I kept going, driven by the desire to live a life free from Scott's control. After months of treatment, I was finally discharged from the hospital. I felt like a new person, ready to start fresh. I heard from a friend that Scott had disappeared. He had tried to borrow money from friends and family, but his desperation had made people suspicious. No one was willing to help him. I didn't know what had happened to him after that, and I didn't care. Knowing he was facing the consequences of his actions was enough for me. I moved out of the house I had once shared with Scott. I found a new place, a peaceful place that was entirely my own. I began working from home, enjoying the independence that came with this new phase of my life. My finances were secure, and I was grateful to have control over my life again. Sometimes friends would ask if I planned to remarry, if I wanted to find love again. But the memories of my time with Scott quickly put an end to those thoughts. I had learned to value my freedom, to cherish the peace of living on my own. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was enough, just as I was. In my new home, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. I was finally free from the past, free to live my life on my own terms. And that was more than enough for me.